Michael Harrison sat at the corner of his office, staring at the stack of reports on his desk. The papers didn't look unusual, regular numbers, invoices, and service summaries, but one line on the customer feedback sheet caught his eye. It read, "Work done well, but the staff seemed rushed and unfriendly." That wasn't what his workshop used to be. Michael had built Harrison Auto Repairs from scratch almost 15 years ago. Back then, it was a small garage with only 2 car lifts and a handful of loyal customers who came not just for service, but for honesty. He had built his reputation on trust, quality, and friendly service. But now things were different. The business had grown into a well-known workshop with over a dozen mechanics, yet something felt off. The complaints had started trickling in a few months ago. Cars being delivered late, customers waiting too long for updates, a few even saying they didn't feel respected. At first, Michael thought maybe it was just a few bad days. Everyone has those. But then he noticed more and more comments mentioning the same thing. Attitude. The kind of attitude that didn't belong in his shop. He had promoted a senior mechanic, Carl, to the role of foreman last year, trusting him to manage the daily operations while Michael focused on expanding the business. Carl had always been skilled, precise, quick, confident. He was good with tools and knew how to handle tough jobs. But leadership was different. Michael had tried calling staff meetings, giving motivational talks, even offering bonuses for good performance, but the results didn't last. Whenever he showed up, everyone straightened up, smiled, and worked like clockwork. The moment he left, things went back to being messy. He could feel it, that fake energy that told him people were only behaving because the boss was around. One Friday evening, after another disappointing review came through, Michael sat alone in the office as the last few workers clocked out. The sound of the rolling shutter closing echoed through the workshop. He looked around at the empty bays, the smell of oil and metal filling the air. The business was running, but the spirit was dying. That's when an idea struck him. Something bold, something he hadn't done before. What if he went undercover? What if he saw everything from the eyes of a regular worker? No title, no authority, just another pair of hands trying to earn a day's wage. It wasn't a new idea. He had seen shows where CEOs went undercover, but now it felt personal. He smiled to himself, thinking about how strange it would be to walk into his own shop pretending to be a stranger. But maybe that was exactly what he needed to do to see the truth. Over the weekend, he planned it out carefully. He told his assistant that he'd be off-site for a few days doing inspection rounds at partner workshops. He also called a friend from a different town to borrow an old car he could use, something that wouldn't look out of place parked outside a repair shop. He decided to disguise himself lightly. Nothing too dramatic, just enough so people wouldn't recognize him instantly. He trimmed his hair differently, grew out a bit of stubble, and bought a pair of thick glasses. He even picked up an old denim jacket and work boots from a thrift store. He looked in the mirror Sunday night and chuckled. He didn't look like the boss of a repair chain anymore. He looked like someone looking for a job. Monday morning, Michael parked his borrowed car a few blocks away and walked toward the shop. The familiar smell of burnt rubber and engine grease greeted him before he even stepped in. From the outside, Harrison Auto Repairs looked the same as always. Busy, slightly noisy, and full of movement. Cars lined up, mechanics shouting to each other, tools clanking. He took a deep breath and walked in. The first person to notice him was a young guy at the reception counter, probably new.
"Hey, can I help you?"
he asked, looking a little uncertain. "Yeah," Michael replied, trying to sound casual. "I heard you might be hiring. I've got some experience working with engines. Looking for a place to learn more and work hard?" The receptionist blinked, not sure what to say. Hang on," he muttered, walking toward the main workshop area. A few minutes later, Carl appeared, wiping his hands with a rag. He looked just like Michael remembered. Strong build, serious face, always moving fast, yeah? "You looking for work?" Carl asked, his tone direct. "Yeah, name's Mike Harris," Michael said, giving the name he'd prepared. "I used to help at a small garage back in my town. I moved here recently. Figured I'd ask if you need an extra hand." Carl gave him a quick look, head to toe, and shrugged. "We're always short on people. You any good with tools?" "I can manage," Michael replied, keeping his answer short. "Fine, you can start today." "We'll see how you do," Carl said, already turning around. "Go grab a uniform from the back. Tell Joe to show you the basics, and try not to get in anyone's way." There was no welcome, no handshake, just a flat instruction. Michael followed the hallway to the back room, where uniforms were hanging. He found one that looked about his size. The name tag on the chest was blank. He pulled it on and caught his reflection in the mirror. He really did look like a new guy now. When he stepped into the main floor, the noise hit him harder. Drills buzzing, tires being changed, someone revving an engine for testing. The atmosphere was chaotic but efficient. Everyone seemed busy, yet no one looked particularly happy. There was tension in the air, like everyone was just trying to survive the day. Joe, the mechanic Carl had mentioned, was an older man with gray streaks in his hair and kind eyes. He smiled when he saw Michael. "You must be the new fella. Come on, I'll show you where things are." Joe was the kind of person who talked while working. Been here 10 years, seen this place grow like crazy. Used to be small, you know? The boss, he's a good man. Started this place from nothing. Michael nodded, hiding a smile. It felt strange hearing someone talk about him like he wasn't there. But, Joe continued, lowering his voice, things changed lately. Carl runs the show now and he's strict. Real strict. Don't cross him, and you'll be fine. Michael stayed quiet, pretending to be focused on the tools Joe was showing him. Inside, though, he felt uneasy. If Joe, one of the older loyal workers, and felt like that, it meant others probably did too. The first task he was given was to clean up around the tool benches and help move a few tires to storage. It was simple, but even that came with glares from a few mechanics who clearly didn't want an extra person slowing them down. By mid-morning, Michael's hands were already greasy. His back ached and sweat dripped from his forehead. It felt good in a strange way, a reminder of how hard the job really was. But he also noticed small things that bothered him. The younger mechanics didn't talk much to each other except to give quick orders. The foreman, Carl, barked instructions more than he communicated. When a customer arrived asking about a delay, the receptionist looked nervous and mumbled something about waiting on parts, and while Carl walked right past without offering help. Michael quietly watched everything, pretending to work while observing how people moved, spoke, and reacted. There was no warmth, no teamwork, just routine. At lunchtime, everyone gathered in the break area. The conversation was mostly complaints, about work hours, about how management didn't listen, about how Carl didn't care. Michael sat quietly, eating the sandwich he had brought. One of the younger mechanics, Dan, looked over and asked, "You're new, right? How long you planning to stick around?" Michael smiled slightly. "As long as they'll have me, I guess." Dan laughed dryly. "We'll see about that. People don't last long under Carl unless they're his favorites." Joe nudged Dan, warning him with a glance, but Michael just nodded, pretending to take it as friendly talk. Inside, he felt a pang of disappointment. This was the environment his business had turned into. People afraid to speak, others just trying to get through the day. Later that afternoon, Carl asked Michael to help lift a gearbox into position. Michael tried to follow instructions, but when he accidentally hesitated, Carl snapped, "If you don't know what you're doing, step aside." "I don't have time to babysit." Michael muttered a quick apology, keeping his head down. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, not from anger, but from sadness. He wasn't angry that Carl yelled at him. He was angry that his employees had to work under someone like this. The day dragged on. Michael stayed quiet, doing small tasks and helping wherever he could. By the time the clock hit 6, everyone was exhausted. As they started cleaning up, Carl walked by and said flatly, "You can come back tomorrow if you want. We'll see if you're any use." No thank you, no encouragement, just cold words. As Michael left the workshop and stepped outside, the evening air felt heavier than usual. He looked back through the open shutter and saw his team, the people he had once trusted to carry his dream forward, moving like machines. No laughter, no lightness, just tired faces and dull eyes. He walked to his car slowly, removing the glasses and rubbing his eyes. The disguise felt unnecessary now. He already felt invisible in there. Driving home, he couldn't stop thinking about how disconnected everything had become. The business had grown, yes, but at what cost? The family spirit that once defined Harrison Auto Repairs was gone, replaced by pressure, fear, and silence. When he got home, he sat in his garage, still wearing the uniform. The smell of oil clung to his hands. He thought about Joe's kind face, Dan's frustration, and Carl's impatience. He realized that what he had seen today was only the surface. There was more underneath, and he needed to see it. He decided right then that he would keep working undercover for the rest of the week. He wanted to see how deep the problem went, not as the boss, but as one of them. It was a strange feeling, being both proud of what he had built and heartbroken by what it had become. But one thing was certain, this week would change everything. As he closed the garage door that night, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I'll go back. I need to know the truth." And with that, the boss of Harrison Auto Repairs prepared to spend another day as Mike Harris, just another mechanic trying to survive in his own shop. The next morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual. His alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but he was already wide awake. The first day undercover had left his mind spinning all night. He had seen enough to know something was wrong, but he couldn't fix anything yet. He needed to understand why it had become this way, and more importantly, who was making it worse. He dressed quietly, grabbed a quick breakfast, and looked at the old uniform hanging near the door. It smelled faintly of oil and metal. He slipped it on, put on his fake glasses, and stared at himself in the mirror. "All right, Mike Harris," he murmured. "Let's see what you find today." The streets were still quiet when he arrived near the workshop. The air was cold and a soft mist covered the parking lot. From a distance, he could see the lights already on inside. Someone was there early. As he got closer, he saw Joe, the older mechanic, rolling up the main shutter. "Morning," Michael said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, you're early," Joe replied with a smile. "That's good. Shows you're serious," Michael smiled back. "Figured I'd get a head start." Joe chuckled softly. "You'll need it if you're working under Carl. He's tough. But don't let him scare you too much. He just likes things done his way." Michael nodded. "I noticed that yesterday." Joe sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, he's been like that lately. Used to be more patient, but ever since he got that foreman position, something changed. He's always in a rush now. Feels like we're chasing numbers instead of fixing cars." That line hit Michael deep. Chasing numbers instead of fixing cars. That wasn't what he had built this business for. As more workers arrived, the shop slowly filled with noise. Engines turning over, tools clanking, the air compressor kicking on and off. Carl showed up about 20 minutes later, coffee in hand and a look that said he'd already had a rough morning. He glanced at Michael briefly. "You're back, huh?" "Yes, sir," Michael said politely. "All right then," Carl replied flatly. "Go help Dan in Bay 3. He's working on that blue sedan that came in yesterday." Michael nodded and walked over. Dan, the young mechanic from the lunch break yesterday, was already deep under the hood of the car. "Hey, you're the new guy, right?" Dan said without looking up. "Yeah. Need a hand?" "Sure. Grab that wrench set and check the bolts on the transmission housing." Michael got to work. He wasn't as fast as he used to be. Years of running a business had kept him behind a desk more than under a car. But the muscle memory was still there. Dan noticed. "You sure you're new?" he asked after a few minutes. "You work pretty smoothly for someone just starting." Michael smiled. "Let's just say I've been around cars long enough." Dan laughed lightly. "Lucky you. Most new hires take forever just to figure out which end of the wrench to use." They worked side by side for the next couple of hours. Dan was quick, smart, and surprisingly careful for his age. He talked a bit about his life, how he'd joined the shop a year ago because it had a good reputation, how he wanted to learn from the best, but lately, he'd been losing motivation. "Why's that?" Michael asked, pretending not to know. Dan shrugged. "It's just not the same anymore. Everyone's walking on eggshells. Carl yells at people for no reason. Jobs pile up and customers get mad. Feels like we're always one step behind." Michael listened quietly. He didn't want to ask too much too soon, but he could hear the frustration in Dan's voice. By mid-morning, Carl came over to check their progress. He leaned over the car, inspecting their work. "You're still on this?" he snapped. "This was supposed to be done an hour ago." Dan froze for a moment. "We were just making sure the alignment was correct, sir." "Didn't want to rush it?" Carl frowned. "Rushing isn't the problem, wasting time is. The customer's coming at noon. If this isn't ready, it's on you." Dan nodded quickly, trying to stay calm. Michael bit his tongue. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Not yet. After Carl walked away, Dan muttered under his breath. "Every time. It's like he's waiting for someone to mess up." Michael pretended not to hear, though his chest tightened. This wasn't leadership. This was pressure without purpose. They finished the car just before lunch. When the customer came to pick it up, Dan walked over to explain what they had fixed. He spoke politely, even though he looked nervous. The customer thanked him, but Carl interrupted mid-conversation, taking over. "Everything's done. Should be good now," Carl said, quickly handing the keys. "You can pay up front." The customer hesitated, glancing at Dan, who had done most of the work, then at Carl. He nodded, paid, and left quietly. As soon as the customer was gone, Dan sighed. "He does that all the time," he said. Takes the credit and walks away. Michael felt a familiar sting, the kind a leader feels when he sees his values being trampled on. During lunch, the team gathered again in the break area. The conversations were louder today, filled with jokes and complaints. Joe sat next to Michael, munching on his sandwich. "Don't mind Carl too much," he said. "He's under pressure from the top. They're pushing him hard to get numbers up." Michael nearly smiled. The top, that was him, and he hadn't pushed anyone for numbers in months. So where was this pressure coming from? Numbers? Michael asked softly. Like revenue? Yeah, Joe nodded. Targets, deadlines, all that stuff. He says management wants faster turnaround times. That's why he's always in a bad mood, Michael frowned. He hadn't given such orders. Could Carl be blaming management to justify his own way of doing things? It wouldn't be the first time someone twisted a rule to fit their own comfort. Later that afternoon, Carl called everyone together for a quick team talk. "All right, listen up," he said, standing near the main floor. "We've got 3 cars that need to be done by end of day. I don't want excuses. If you need help, figure it out. And Harris," he pointed toward Michael, "you can clean the floor and prep the next car for inspection." Michael nodded without argument. He swept, cleaned, organized, tasks he hadn't done since his early days as a mechanic. But he didn't mind. While working, he kept his ears open. He overheard 2 younger workers complaining quietly nearby. "I swear, man, I can't keep up. He keeps pushing for faster turnarounds, but we're not robots." "Yeah," the other said. "I'm thinking of quitting. I didn't sign up to get yelled at every day." Michael's heart sank. He wanted to step in, reassure them, tell them their work mattered. But Mike Harris couldn't do that. Not yet. Around 3 p.m., an argument broke out between Carl and one of the parts suppliers on the phone. Everyone could hear Carl shouting, frustrated about a delay in parts delivery. When he hung up, he threw the clipboard on the counter and muttered, "Unbelievable. Can't rely on anyone these days." Michael watched him silently. Carl wasn't just stressed, and he was burnt out. That much was clear, but he was spreading that frustration to everyone else instead of managing it. By late afternoon, the mood in the shop grew heavier. A car's repair estimate had gone wrong. The part cost was higher than what was quoted to the customer. Instead of explaining honestly, Carl told the receptionist to say the system messed up. That was it. Michael felt a cold twist in his stomach. Dishonesty, the one thing he had always warned his team about. After closing hours, when everyone was packing up, Joe approached Michael. "You did good today," he said warmly. "Don't let Carl's tone get to you. Deep down, he's not a bad guy. Just lost his patience." Michael smiled faintly. "Thanks, Joe. I'll keep that in mind." As they walked out, Michael noticed Dan sitting near one of the tool benches, staring at the floor. "You okay?" he asked. Dan shrugged. "Just tired. Some days I wonder why I'm still here." Michael nodded quietly. "Maybe because you care more than you realize." Dan looked at him for a moment, confused, then smiled slightly. Maybe. That night, Michael drove home again in silence. The roads were dark, but his mind was louder than ever. Every moment from the day replayed. The sharp tone in Carl's voice, the fear in Dan's eyes, the tired slump in Joe's shoulders. This wasn't just about one bad attitude. It was about the whole system inside his workshop, a system that had lost its soul. At home, he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. The stars above were faint, but they were enough to keep him company. He thought about the early days when he and 2 friends would work until midnight, fixing cars for customers who couldn't afford big repairs. They'd laugh, share food, and talk about dreams. Back then, the workshop was more than a business, and it was a family. Now it felt like a machine running on exhaustion. He opened his old notebook, the one he used when he first started the shop. Inside were scribbled notes and reminders. Things like treat every customer like family, and never compromise safety for speed. He ran his finger over those lines, wondering when things had drifted away from that. The next morning, he decided to change how he'd approach things. Instead of just observing, he would start testing the environment. See how people reacted to kindness, teamwork, and honesty. He arrived early again, greeted everyone, and offered to help with tasks before being asked. Some looked surprised, others just ignored him. But Joe smiled. "You're a good worker, Mike. Keep that up." Carl, however, didn't like it. When he saw Michael helping another mechanic clean up a spill, he frowned. "Hey, you've got your own job. Don't waste time doing someone else's work." Michael kept his voice calm. "Just trying to help, sir. The faster we clean up, the sooner we get back to work." Carl didn't respond. He just walked away, muttering something under his breath. Throughout the day, Michael continued to notice small cracks, like how some mechanics avoided speaking up even when something wasn't safe, fearing Carl's reaction, or how the receptionist hesitated before calling customers because she didn't want to relay bad news. Everyone was afraid of getting blamed. During a short break, Michael found himself alone near the back of the shop. Joe walked over with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "You know," Joe said, sipping his drink, "you remind me of how the boss used to be back in the day. Always hands-on, always helping out." Michael smiled softly. "Really?" "Yeah," Joe said, his eyes distant. "He was fair. Tough when needed, but fair. He cared, you could feel it. These days, I don't know where that spirit went." Michael looked down at his cup. "Maybe it's still around. Just hiding under all the noise," Joe chuckled. "I hope so." By the end of the second day, Michael was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. He had seen enough to know that the heart of his company was fading fast. Still, he wasn't angry. He was determined. He knew that before he could fix it, he had to let the truth fully reveal itself. And that meant staying undercover a little longer, to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. As he drove home that night, he whispered quietly, "Tomorrow I'll push a little harder. Let's see who really cares." He didn't know it yet. But the next day would bring a moment that would shake him. A test that would show him just how far things had fallen inside his own walls. The third morning came faster than Michael expected. His alarm buzzed, but he was already awake, lying there in the quiet, staring at the ceiling. He felt both tired and restless, like his mind had been running all night even while his body tried to rest. He sat up, rubbed his face, and thought about what he had seen so far. The workshop wasn't broken because of the work. It was broken because of how people treated each other. The skills were there, the equipment was there, but the heart wasn't. That was harder to fix than any engine problem. He got ready quickly, put on the same worn-out uniform, and looked at himself in the mirror again. Each day he looked more like one of the workers and less like the man who owned the business. Maybe that was a good thing. It helped him see things clearly, without the filters, without the polished talk people used when they knew the boss was listening. When he arrived at the shop, it was already busy. The sound of tools clinking, air guns hissing, and engines roaring filled the air. Carl's voice echoed through the space, sharp and impatient as always. "Let's move faster, people. We've got 3 cars due before lunch." Michael walked in quietly and joined the flow. Nobody greeted him that morning. Everyone was already deep in work. He went straight to the back where Joe was tightening bolts on a truck. "Morning," Michael said. Joe looked up with a small smile. "Hey there, Mike, you're early again." "Couldn't sleep much," Michael said, grabbing a tool to help. Joe chuckled softly. "That makes 2 of us." They worked side by side for a while, not talking much. The sound of tools filled the silence between them. It was a comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that comes from mutual respect. Around 9, Carl walked by, barking a few instructions. He stopped when he saw Michael helping Joe. "Harris, when you're done there, check the red sedan in Bay 2. It's got a brake issue." Michael nodded. "Yes, sir." Carl frowned slightly as if the polite tone irritated him. "And don't waste time triple-checking everything. Just get it done. We've got a backlog." Michael didn't answer. He just turned back to his work. Inside, though, that line made him pause. Don't triple-check everything. In his shop, safety was always supposed to come before speed. Always. When the truck was done, Michael moved to the red sedan. He popped the hood and took a look. The brake lines were worn and the rotors looked like they hadn't been replaced in years. He crouched down and started examining the underside. After a few minutes, he found the problem. The left rear brake hose had a crack near the fitting. It wasn't completely broken, but it was weak enough to fail soon. That meant the car wasn't safe to drive. Dan walked over holding a clipboard. "You're on that sedan, right?" "Yeah," Michael said. "These brakes are bad. That hose needs replacing before this goes anywhere." Dan frowned, flipping through the paperwork. The customer only approved a pad and rotor change. No mention of the hose. Michael looked up at him. "Then we need to call them and tell them. They have to approve that repair. Otherwise it's not safe." Before Dan could reply, Carl's voice came from behind them. "What's taking so long over here?" Michael stood up and explained calmly. "This brake hose is cracked. We shouldn't send this car out until it's replaced." Carl walked closer, kneeling to take a quick look. "It's not leaking," he said flatly. "Replace the pads and rotors, bleed the brakes, and move it out." Michael shook his head slightly. "Sir, with respect, that hose could fail any time. It's brittle. If it bursts on the road," Carl cut him off. "I said do what's on the order. We're not adding parts without customer approval. It'll take another hour, and we're already behind." Michael stayed quiet for a second, choosing his words carefully. "But it's a safety issue. We can't risk that." Carl's expression hardened. "You're not the one making decisions here, Harris. I am. Do as you're told." The words hit Michael harder than he expected. For a second, he forgot he was undercover. He wanted to shout, "This is my workshop," but he stopped himself. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Understood." As Carl walked away, Dan looked uncomfortable. "I get what you mean," he whispered. "But if we go against him, he'll make our lives miserable." Michael crouched back down and stared at the brake hose. His hands were trembling slightly, not from fear but from frustration. He couldn't believe what he'd just seen. His own employee putting deadlines above safety. He decided he couldn't stay silent. "Dan," he said quietly, "I'll take care of it. Just tell the front desk to hold this car for another half hour. I'll replace the hose myself. If Carl asks, I'll say it took longer to bleed the brakes." Dan hesitated. "You sure?" Michael nodded. "It's the right thing to do." So he did it. He pulled out a spare hose from the parts bin, replaced the damaged one, and tested the brakes twice. It added some extra time, but when he finished, the car was truly safe to drive. When Carl came back, he looked at his watch. "Finally done?" "Yes," Michael said calmly. Carl walked around, checked the car quickly, then frowned. "You replaced the hose, didn't you?" Michael didn't deny it. "Yes, it was cracked." "It needed to be done." Carl's tone turned cold. "Did the customer approve that?" "No buts," Carl snapped. "You don't get to make that call. I told you what to do." Michael kept his voice even. "I couldn't let a car go out like that. It wasn't safe." Carl glared at him for a long moment. The other mechanics had stopped working, watching silently from their bays. Finally, Carl said, "You think you know better than me, huh? You've been here 2 days and you're already questioning my orders?" Michael stayed quiet. He didn't want to escalate. Carl shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable. You new guys think you're heroes." Then, louder, he added, "Next time, do what you're told or don't bother showing up." Michael watched him walk away, jaw tight but expression calm. The rest of the team went back to work quietly, pretending nothing had happened, but the tension in the air was thick. After that, the day moved slower. People avoided talking much. Dan gave Michael a few looks of quiet respect, and Joe patted his shoulder once in passing, saying softly, "You did the right thing." But Carl didn't speak to him again the rest of the day. He just gave short orders and avoided eye contact. When the shop finally closed, Michael stayed behind pretending to clean. But really, he just needed a minute to think. He couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed in his own business. A foreman choosing convenience over safety, and yelling at someone for doing the right thing. He thought back to the early years when he'd worked on cars himself. He used to tell every new mechanic, "If you wouldn't drive it yourself, don't hand it to a customer." That was the rule. The golden rule. And now, the man he'd trusted to lead his team had thrown that out the window. As he was about to leave, Joe came over quietly. "I saw what happened," he said. "Don't worry about Carl. He's been like this for months. Used to care about quality, but now all he talks about is numbers. Half the team's afraid to speak up." Michael sighed. "Doesn't anyone tell him he's going too far?" Joe gave a tired laugh. "Who's going to tell him? Management doesn't visit often, and when they do, he puts on a nice face. Makes it look like everything's perfect. You've seen it. The moment the higher-ups walk in, everyone's smiling. The second they leave, it's back to pressure and shouting. Michael nodded slowly. It was exactly what he'd suspected. The truth was out in the open now. He thanked Joe, said goodnight, and walked to his car. The night air felt heavy again, pressing against his chest. He sat in the driver's seat for a while without starting the engine. He thought about what would have happened if he hadn't been there today. That car could have gone back to the customer with a weak brake hose. Maybe nothing bad would have happened, or maybe something terrible would have. That thought made him shiver. He turned the key and drove home slowly, lost in thought. When he got home, he didn't go inside right away. He sat in the dark driveway, headlights off, just thinking. He realized that his business wasn't failing because of lack of skill or customers. It was failing because the values had been lost. The people didn't feel safe, the foreman was controlling out of fear, and honesty had taken a back seat to speed. That night, he couldn't sleep again. He tossed and turned, replaying the scene in his head. Carl's tone, the look on Dan's face, the silence of everyone around them. It wasn't just one man's mistake. It was a culture problem. A culture that had been allowed to grow because he'd stepped away. The next morning, Michael arrived at the workshop before sunrise. The sky was still gray, the air crisp and quiet. He walked inside, turned on the lights, and just stood there for a moment. The place that once made him proud now made him feel like a stranger. He walked around, touching the workbenches, the walls, the old posters that still hung from when the shop first opened. One of them had a slogan he'd chosen years ago. "We fix cars, but we build trust." He stared at it for a long time. The words felt almost ironic now. Joe arrived a little later and smiled faintly when he saw him. "You're here early again." "Couldn't sleep," Michael said softly. "Wanted to get a head start," Joe nodded. "That's good. Shows you care." Michael smiled a little. "Yeah, I guess it does." The rest of the team arrived one by one. Dan gave a small nod in greeting. Carl walked in last, his usual serious look on his face. He didn't even glance at Michael. The day began like any other. Jobs, noise, deadlines. But underneath, the air felt different. People were quieter, more cautious, maybe still thinking about the confrontation from yesterday. Michael worked quietly, keeping to himself. He wanted to see how Carl behaved after that. Would he change? Would he soften up a bit? But by late morning, it was clear nothing had changed. Carl was even more irritable than before. He scolded one mechanic for taking too long to check a sensor, snapped at the receptionist for misplacing a work order, and complained about how slow everyone was moving. It was exhausting just watching him. Around noon, a customer arrived asking to speak with a mechanic about a strange sound in his engine. The receptionist, clearly nervous, looked at Carl for help. Carl waved his hand impatiently. "Just tell them we'll look at it later." The customer frowned, frustrated, and left. Michael felt his chest tighten again. He had built his shop's reputation on respect for every single customer. And now it was slipping away, one small careless moment at a time. That afternoon, Michael decided to test something. When Carl wasn't around, he quietly helped another mechanic double-check a job before sending the car out. They caught a loose bolt that could have caused a problem later. The young mechanic thanked him quietly, saying, "If Carl saw me checking twice, he'd say I was wasting time." Michael shook his head gently. "Checking twice saves lives," he said softly. The mechanic smiled nervously, like he wanted to believe that but couldn't afford to. By closing time, Michael's mind was made up. He had seen enough. He'd seen the dishonesty, the pressure, the fear. He now understood why complaints had started coming in, and why customers had stopped trusting the brand. It wasn't the workers' fault. They were trying. It was the leadership, and leadership started at the top. As he walked out that evening, Carl called out to him. "Hey, Harris," Michael turned around. "Yes?" Carl crossed his arms. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, but this place doesn't need heroes. We need workers who follow orders. You understand me?" Michael nodded quietly. "I understand." "Good," Carl said. "Because one more stunt like yesterday and you're out." Michael didn't reply. He just gave a small nod, turned, and walked out. But inside, a storm was building. Tomorrow he would start revealing who he really was. The truth was no longer just about broken systems or poor leadership. It was personal. His name was still on that building, and he wasn't going to let it stand for shortcuts and fear any longer. That night, as he sat on his porch again, he looked up at the stars and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, I stop pretending." He didn't know exactly how the team would react, but he knew one thing for sure. The moment of truth was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning felt different from all the others. The air was cool, but Michael's chest was warm with determination. He had made up his mind the night before. There would be no more pretending. No more hiding behind the name tag of Mike Harris. He woke before the sun, sat at his small kitchen table, and drank his coffee slowly. The clock ticked quietly on the wall. His thoughts were steady now, calm, but sharp. He had spent 3 weeks inside his own workshop, and what he'd seen broke his heart. The people were good but tired. The system was broken, not because of lack of skill, but because of fear. Fear of losing jobs, fear of speaking up, fear of Carl. Michael had built this business to give people pride and purpose, a place where hard work meant something. And now it had become the opposite. That couldn't continue. By the time he finished his coffee, the sun was starting to rise. He put on his usual uniform one last time. The oil-stained shirt, the old jeans, the boots with scuffed toes. Then he took a deep breath, locked his door, and drove toward the workshop. He parked around the corner. As always, but this time, instead of blending in, he stood outside for a moment, watching the morning light hit the building, his building. The sign above the door still carried his name, bold, proud, and full of meaning once. He smiled faintly. "Let's make it mean something again," he whispered. When he stepped inside, the usual sounds greeted him, the clatter of tools, the low hum of engines, and the quick footsteps of mechanics getting ready for the day. No one paid much attention to him at first. He was just Mike, the quiet new guy who worked hard and didn't talk much, but today he felt taller somehow. More certain, Joe spotted him first. "Morning, Mike," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," Michael said, smiling. "Busy day ahead?" "Always," Joe chuckled. "Carl's already barking orders." Michael nodded. "Figures." Carl appeared a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, already giving instructions. He didn't even glance at Michael at first. "Let's move fast today, people. I've got 3 customers waiting for updates before noon," he said. Then he turned toward Michael. "Harris, you're on inspection duty again. Keep it quick." Michael gave a small nod. "Sure thing." Carl walked off, talking loudly to another worker. The rest of the morning went by quietly. Michael worked as usual, but his mind was focused on what he was going to do next. Around noon, when things slowed down a bit, he saw his chance. He waited until Carl was done talking to a supplier on the phone, then walked up to him. "Hey, Carl," he said calmly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Carl barely looked up. "Make it quick," Michael nodded. "It's about the shop," Carl sighed. "What about it?" Michael took a breath. "I think we need to have a serious conversation. Not as workers, but as people who care about this place." Carl frowned, clearly impatient. "What's this about?" Michael held his gaze. "It's about the way things have been run. The pressure, the shortcuts, the way people are treated here." Carl's eyes narrowed. "You're out of line, Harris. This isn't your concern. You do your job, I'll do mine." Michael didn't move. "It is my concern. More than you know." Carl's voice hardened. "You've been here, what, 3 weeks? You think that gives you the right to tell me how to run this place?" Michael took another step closer, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, because this isn't just any workshop." "It's mine." Carl blinked, confused for a second. Then his expression changed. "What are you talking about?" Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his old ID card, the one with his full name, Michael Reed, printed below the company logo. He placed it gently on the counter. "This business," he said softly, "was built by me." The room went silent. A few mechanics nearby froze mid-motion. Dan, who was carrying a box of parts, stopped in his tracks. Joe turned around slowly, eyes wide. Carl stared at the ID, his face pale. You're kidding." Michael shook his head. "No. I've been here to see what's really happening. To understand why things have changed." Carl stammered. You were working undercover?" "Yes," Michael said simply, "because I wanted to see the truth. Not the version people show me when they know I'm the owner." Carl's mouth opened, but no words came out. Around them, the workshop was dead silent except for the faint ticking of a cooling engine. Michael continued, his voice even and clear. I've seen how my people are treated. I've seen how safety is ignored, how corners are cut, how fear has replaced teamwork. That's not what this place was built for. Carl finally found his voice. I was doing what needed to be done. The market's tough, deadlines are tight, customers want things fast. And you thought fear would fix that? Michael interrupted gently. You thought yelling and shortcuts would save time? Carl's jaw clenched. You don't understand what it's like down here every day. Michael looked him straight in the eyes. I do. That's why I came down here, to understand. And I do now. The silence stretched again, briefly. Michael said quietly, Go home for today. Carl, we'll talk later. Carl looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Michael's tone stopped him. He nodded stiffly, turned and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind him, everyone in the workshop looked at Michael. He could feel the weight of their eyes, confusion, surprise, curiosity, even fear. Joe stepped forward slowly. You're really the owner? Michael nodded. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I needed to see things the way they really were. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Dan finally said, So what happens now? Michael took a deep breath. Now we start fixing this place, together. He walked to the center of the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice carried across the room, calm but strong. I built this shop with one rule. We don't just fix cars, we fix trust. Somewhere along the way we forgot that. I forgot that. I stepped back too much. I trusted the wrong people to lead the right way. That's on me. The workers looked at him quietly. But that ends today, Michael continued. No more shortcuts. No more shouting. No more fear. I don't care how busy we are. If something isn't safe, we don't send it out. If someone's struggling, we help. If someone has an idea, we listen. He looked around at the faces in front of him. Men and women who had worked long hours for years, who had once loved what they did but had slowly lost that spark. I want that spark back, he said softly, because this isn't just my workshop. It's ours. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Joe nodded slowly. About time someone said that. A few others nodded too. The tension in the air started to ease. Michael smiled faintly. All right then. Let's get back to work, and but the right way this time. That day felt lighter. People still worked hard, but there was something different in the air. Relief, maybe even hope. Dan double-checked his work without looking over his shoulder. Joe cracked a small joke at lunch, and people actually laughed. Even though the revelation had shocked everyone, it also seemed to lift something off their shoulders. Later that afternoon, Carl returned. He looked uneasy, standing near the doorway. Michael saw him and walked over calmly. Come in, Michael said. We need to talk. Carl hesitated, then stepped inside. The rest of the team went quiet again, watching from a distance. Michael motioned for him to sit down at the small table in the corner. You've been with this company a long time, he began. You know how it used to be. Carl nodded stiffly. Yeah, things were different back then. Michael leaned forward slightly. What happened? Carl sighed. The pressure. The numbers. When the market got tighter, I started cutting corners. I didn't mean to make it toxic, I just thought pushing people harder would keep things running. But I guess I went too far. Michael studied his face. There was no arrogance there now, just exhaustion. He said quietly, I understand the pressure. But fear doesn't build loyalty. It only hides problems until they explode. Carl nodded slowly, looking down. You're right. Michael took a deep breath. I don't want to fire you, Carl. You know this place better than anyone. But things have to change. From now on, respect comes first. Safety comes first. If that's something you can stand by, you stay. If not, you walk. Carl looked up, surprised. You'd still give me a chance after everything? Yes, Michael said simply. Because I believe people can change, and if they want to. Carl sat in silence for a long time, then finally nodded. I'll earn it back. I promise. Michael extended his hand. Carl hesitated, then shook it. After that, the atmosphere in the workshop began to shift little by little. The yelling stopped. The rush faded. Conversations became calmer, more focused. A few days later, Michael called a meeting with the whole team. He stood in front of them, not as a boss giving orders, but as a person asking for unity. I know it'll take time to rebuild trust, he said, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll be working beside you, not above you. We'll fix what's broken one day at a time. Joe smiled faintly. Looks like we got our old shop back. Michael chuckled softly. That's the plan. Over the next few weeks, things began to change in real ways. Customers noticed, too. People started mentioning how the mechanics actually explained things clearly again, how the atmosphere felt welcoming one day. A woman came to pick up her car and told Michael, "You can tell this place cares. It's not just about the money." That single comment meant more to him than any sales report ever could. He spent more time on the floor now, talking to his workers, asking about their families, their goals, their ideas. Slowly, the walls of fear came down. Carl worked quietly and respectfully. He still had his rough edges, but the shouting stopped. He even apologized to Dan one morning, which surprised everyone. One evening after closing, Michael and Joe sat on the hood of an old truck, sipping coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. Joe said softly, "You know, I was about ready to quit before you showed up." Michael looked at him. "Really?" "Yeah," Joe said. "I loved this place once. Then it stopped feeling like a family, but now it feels alive again." Michael smiled, looking out at the glowing sky. "That's all I wanted," Joe nodded. "You did good, boss," Michael laughed. "Don't call me that," Joe grinned. "All right, Mike." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because people were trying again. Together. The next morning, when he arrived early as usual, he noticed something new taped to the wall near the time clock. It was a hand-drawn sign made with a marker. It read, "We fix cars, but we build trust." He stood there for a moment, smiling quietly. Someone, maybe Dan, maybe one of the younger workers, had taken the time to rewrite the old motto by hand. And somehow, it meant even more now than when he'd first written it years ago. He walked into the workshop feeling proud, not of himself, but of the people around him. He knew there would still be tough days ahead, challenges, mistakes. But now they would face them together, not as workers following orders, but as a team with a shared purpose. The business would survive. More than that, it would thrive, because it had found its heart again. And as the morning light poured in through the open doors, Michael rolled up his sleeves, smiled, and said, "All right, team, let's get to work." Weeks passed, and the workshop began to look and feel different. The air no longer carried the sharp edge of stress and tension. Instead, it was filled with something lighter, laughter, quiet music from a small radio in the corner, and the steady rhythm of people who worked with purpose again. The changes didn't happen overnight, but little by little they became real. There were still mistakes sometimes, parts that arrived late, jobs that took longer than expected. But now, those moments didn't end in shouting. They ended in teamwork. Michael watched all of it unfold each day with quiet pride. He didn't talk much about what had happened before. He didn't want to dwell on the past. What mattered was what they were building now. On a cool Friday morning, the sunlight slanted through the open garage doors, catching the dust in golden streaks. Joe was laughing with Dan about something near the engine bay. Even Carl, who used to bark orders, now worked shoulder to shoulder with the team, talking calmly, sharing tips. Michael stood near the office doorway, holding a cup of coffee, just watching them. This was what he had dreamed of when he first opened the place. A team that trusted each other. A space filled with pride, not pressure. As he took a sip, Joe noticed him and waved. "You just gonna stand there watching or lend a hand?" Michael laughed and walked over. "All right, what's the problem today?" "Nothing we can't handle," Joe said with a grin. "But you might want to check this, the engine mounts are acting funny." Michael leaned over the car, listening to the faint rattle as the engine idled. Sounds like the bolts are unevenly tightened." "Easy fix." Dan handed him a wrench, and the three of them worked together. For a few moments, it felt like the early days all over again. Long hours, greasy hands, but full hearts. Later that afternoon, a customer came in, a middle-aged man holding his car keys nervously. "Hey, I think my brakes are giving out," he said. "Can someone take a look?" "Of course," Dan said quickly, smiling. "We'll take care of it right away." Michael watched the exchange from a few feet away, smiling to himself. Dan had grown so much in just a few months. He was confident now. Not because someone told him to be, but because he believed in what he was doing. As the day went on, Michael made his usual rounds, checking on things quietly. In the office, he noticed the suggestion box sitting on the counter. He had set it up a few weeks earlier, asking everyone to write down ideas, big or small, for improving the shop. At first it was empty every day. Now it was always full of little folded papers. He opened a few. Can we paint the break room? It looks dull. Maybe organize a customer appreciation day once a month. Could we get better lighting in Bay 2? Simple ideas. Honest ideas. Real voices. Michael smiled as he read through them. They weren't afraid to speak anymore. That more than anything showed him that things were working. A few minutes later, he heard a knock at the office door. It was Carl. Got a minute? Carl asked quietly. Of course, Michael said, setting the papers aside. Come in. Carl walked in, looking a bit nervous. He had changed a lot over the past few weeks. The anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by something humbler, steadier. I just wanted to say thanks, Carl said slowly, for not firing me when you had every reason to. Michael shook his head. I didn't want to fire you. I wanted you to see what I saw, that this place can be more than a job. Carl nodded. It took me a while to get it. I thought leading meant being tough all the time. But I was wrong. These guys, they work harder when they feel respected. Michael smiled faintly. You're learning fast. Carl chuckled softly. Guess I had a good teacher. Michael waved it off. No teachers here. Just people figuring it out together. Carl looked around the office. Feels good again, doesn't it? It does, Michael said quietly. Better than ever. That evening, after the last car rolled out, the team gathered for a small meeting. Nothing formal, just everyone sitting around with cold drinks and tired smiles. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky orange and purple. Michael stood up and looked at his crew. I wanted to take a minute to thank you all, he began. When I came back here, I wasn't sure what I'd find. But what I found was a group of people who care deeply, even when things were tough. He paused for a moment. Looking at their faces, Joe's familiar grin, Dan's bright eyes, Carl's calm expression. I've learned something important these past weeks, he continued. It's not enough to own a business. You have to live it, breathe it, and stand beside the people who keep it alive. You've reminded me of that. There was a quiet murmur of agreement. Joe raised his can. To better days, he said with a grin. To better days, everyone echoed, raising their drinks. They laughed, clinked cans, and stayed there, talking long after the sun went down. It wasn't a party, just a quiet, shared peace between people who had been through something hard and come out stronger. The next morning, Michael woke up to a message from one of the shop's oldest customers. It said, heard you're back on the floor again. The place feels different now, in a good way. Proud of you. He smiled and put his phone down. That simple message meant everything. Over the next few months, business grew again. Customers started coming back, not because of fancy ads or discounts, but because word spread. People said things like, they treat you right there, and they actually care about your car. One afternoon, a reporter from a local magazine showed up, asking to write a feature about the shop. Michael laughed when she asked for an interview. There's no big secret, he said. Just good people who care about doing things the right way. The article came out a few weeks later with the headline, Local Workshop Rebuilds Trust, One Repair at a Time. It brought even more customers, but more importantly, it brought pride back to the team. On the day the article was published, the whole crew gathered in the break room to see it. Joe slapped the magazine down on the table and said, Well, would you look at that? We're famous now. Everyone laughed, and Dan said, Guess we better not mess up any oil changes now. Michael chuckled. That's the spirit. Later that day, when things quieted down, Dan came up to Michael while cleaning up his station. Can I tell you something? He asked. Of course, Michael said. When I first started here, Dan said, I used to think about quitting almost every day. It was hard. I didn't feel like I mattered. But now? He paused and smiled. Now I actually love coming here. It feels like we're part of something again. Michael's chest warmed. You are, Dan. Every one of you. That night after everyone left, Michael stayed behind for a while. The shop was quiet except for the soft ticking of the cooling machines. He walked slowly around, running his hand along the workbenches, the old toolboxes, the faded posters that had been there since the early days. He remembered the first car he ever fixed in that very spot, an old pickup belonging to a single mother who couldn't afford a new one. He'd stayed up all night working on it, not for the money, but because she needed it to get to work. That was the kind of heart he wanted this place to always have. As he stood there, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Joe again. "Still here?" Joe asked. "Yeah," Michael said. "Just thinking." Joe looked around the quiet shop. "You know, it's funny. I used to think this place was dying. But look at it now." "You turned it around." Michael shook his head. "We turned it around," Joe smiled. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a while, then Joe said, "You ever think about opening another branch again?" Michael chuckled softly. "Maybe one day. But for now, I think I'll stay right here." "This is where I belong," Joe nodded. "Good choice." The next day, a young man came into the shop asking for a job. He was nervous, hands fidgeting, voice unsure. "I don't have much experience," he said quietly, "but I really want to learn." Michael saw something familiar in his eyes, the same spark he once had when he was just starting out. He smiled. "You're in the right place. Around here, if you're willing to learn, we'll teach you." The young man smiled with relief. "Thank you, sir." Michael handed him a pair of coveralls. "Don't call me sir. Just call me Mike." The new guy grinned. "All right, Mike." And just like that, the cycle began again. One more person joining the family. One more chance to keep the heart of the workshop alive. A few weeks later, the team organized a small open day for customers and families. There were snacks, drinks, a raffle, even a small stage set up outside. Kids ran around laughing while parents chatted with the mechanics. Michael stood near the entrance, greeting people as they came in. He watched his workers talking to customers, smiling, explaining repairs, shaking hands. The place was full of warmth and noise, the good kind. At one point, Joe came over and handed him a burger. "You better eat something before it's all gone," he said. Michael laughed. "Thanks, you having a good time?" "Best day in years," Joe said. Later, as the sun began to set, someone turned on music and the team started dancing and joking. Carl even joined in, laughing harder than anyone expected him to. It was simple, joyful chaos, and it was perfect. As the evening came to an end, Michael stood outside the shop, watching the last few guests leave. The sky was streaked with deep pink and gold. The sound of laughter still echoed faintly from inside. He felt a quiet sense of peace wash over him. He thought about everything that had happened. The disguise, the shock, the hard conversations, the rebuilding. It had been a journey full of lessons. He had gone undercover to find out what was wrong with his company. What he discovered instead was something even more important, what it truly meant to lead. It wasn't about giving orders or chasing profits. It was about listening, caring, and standing with people when things got tough. He smiled to himself and whispered, "We did it." As he turned off the lights and locked the door, he looked back at the sign above the shop one more time. The name gleamed softly under the streetlight. He remembered the handwritten sign inside. "We fix cars, but we build trust." He knew those words would live on, even long after him. And as he walked toward his car, the night air cool around him, he felt nothing but gratitude. The workshop was alive again, not just with work, but with heart. And that, he thought, was the best repair job he'd ever been a part of.